This is the Great Salt Lake in 1986, and this is the Great Salt Lake in 2022. Clearly, something is wrong. So what is the Great Salt Lake? There used to be a massive lake called Lake Bonneville that existed around 25,000 years ago. It dried up, and most of what is left is the Great Salt Lake. Water also comes into the lake from melted snow from mounds, also known as watershed.
And the Great Salt Lake State Park Marina, and we're going to talk a little bit about recreation. Great Salt Lake has always been a curiosity and an attraction to tourists, and it was no different in the 19th century. The original Mormon pioneers, shortly after arriving in the valley, made a reconnaissance out to the lake and bathed in the lake. It was famous as America's Dead Sea.
So that's the cultural significance and how it was made, but what's the issue? Well, the lake is drying up, and we need to take action now, or else the lake, those dependent on it, and the regions around it will take a toll.
Gets smaller and shallower. Water levels are projected to hit a 170-year low this year. That's partly due to the diversion of river water to nearby towns and farms instead of the lake. Now, drought and evaporation, fueled by climate change, are making things even worse.
Microbialites, they're like Great Salt Lake's trees. They're powerhouses. They produce a lot of oxygen. Those microbialites, for the first time ever, are going to be out of water.
And leaving masses of brine flies and brine shrimp without food. Moving up the food chain, resident and migratory birds like pelicans and eared grebes.
Over 95% of the world's eared grebes comes here to rest and refuel.
Drying lake could also affect human health. As the water retreats, it's leaving a dusty, dry lake bed.
Can be contaminated with disease-causing microbes and toxins like mercury and arsenic, and it could worsen the region's already polluted air.
Just about every kind of disease that you know is associated with smoking cigarettes is associated with air pollution exposure.
So, how to save the Great Salt Lake and everything living in and around it?
How do we save the Great Salt Lake? Well, snowmelt from the mountains isn't the only source of water to the lake. Water also comes in from rivers, and more obviously, rainfall. Humans take water that would normally be going to the lake from the rivers and watershed. Around 65% of the lake's watershed is used by humans. According to Utah Rivers Council, 85% of diverted water goes to agricultural purposes, 7.5% industrial purposes, 5.6% residential outdoor purposes, and 1.9% residential indoor purposes. Clearly, water usage is heavily affecting the lake. So, as a newly elected member of Congress, what can be done to help the lake? A bill could be made that changes how people use the Great Salt Lake's watershed. The watershed would be regulated only by the government, and only 38% of the watershed would be used instead of 65%. Farmers will be informed of the most efficient and effective way to distribute water among specific crops, and will be paid subsidies for growing crops that require little water. However, there are some downsides to my bill. A main opposition is that decreasing water for farms will increase prices of crops, as the crops would become harder to obtain. Also, many small farms would be shut down if they cannot get enough water to grow their crops. Clean water would become more expensive as well, because less lake watershed is being used for clean water. This means clean water would be harder to obtain for those in poverty. While the disadvantages of the bill are important to recognize, there are also many issues if the lake is not saved. Eared grebes will have difficulty surviving because, as previously mentioned, they are reliant on the Great Salt Lake. The mercury and arsenic that will pollute the air if the Great Salt Lake dries up will be very harmful to human life, not just around the lake, but even in states surrounding Utah. According to the Utah Division of Water Resources, the Great Salt Lake employs 7,706 jobs and produces $1.32 billion every year. Utah's economy would heavily suffer from the lake drying up. Senator Mitt Romney supports limiting water to protect the Great Salt Lake.
Well, we're going to have to dramatically reduce our usage of water. because the water flowing into the Great Salt Lake is insufficient to keep it filled. And the consequence, not just for Utah, but for other states downwind, is pretty significant.
Mitt Romney has already made the bill, Great Salt Lake Recovery Act, to, according to his website, study historic drought conditions and protect the long-term health of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. The impact of the drying of the Great Salt Lake is already far-reaching. However, with support from Mitt Romney and other local and state representatives, we have the opportunity to reverse the damage and save the Great Salt Lake for future generations.